It may be the offseason, but this is actually prime time for building championship teams in Dynasty Fantasy Football. This is our best chance to exploit the Dynasty trade market. Find those misvalued players who we can add to our roster now and watch them accrue value over the next several months. So that's what we're doing today, giving our favorite Dynasty trade targets and a couple guys we're going to sell to. So, Sam, let's start with you. Who's your first Dynasty buy early on here in the 2025 offseason?
Well, my first buy, I'll start with my most expensive. It's not necessarily, somebody that's going to come to you cheap, but Dynasty is there's so many redraft people switching over to Dynasty that it's really become a what have you done for me lately kind of situation. And there's already owners panicking about Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvin Harrison was, pretty much the consensus number one receiver, if not the number one player in last year's draft. But, there's a lot of things out of our control. You don't know what's going on with landing spots. You don't know what's going on with play calling, which I'll get to in a second. And who ends up in better situations, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, the days are gone where you can just expect all of the highly touted rookies to walk in the door and produce. Some will, some won't. Marvin last year had 62 catches for 885 yards. He was over 14 yards per reception. And I believe 8 touchdowns, which isn't bad for a rookie. I mean, you know what I mean? I'm not going to kick him out of bed for spilling crumbs or anything. But you're sitting there watching this, and then you're seeing what Malik Neighbors is doing. And the game is different for those two guys. The competition's different. The play calling is different. The personnel is different. Malik Neighbors didn't have a Trey McBride on his team catching all those balls. And frankly, Kyler Murray wasn't even that good if he didn't run the ball. He would have been, further down the quarterback rankings. So I'm still willing to pay a first for Marvin Harrison Jr. I think savvy owners will shut you down real quick. And I don't advise necessarily, driving up the price just to get him. But there are enough owners out there that are panicking just enough or have other needs on their team, or who there's a lot of owners that just love having first-round picks. So you never know. I mean, you might score with one of them if you reach out.
Yeah, this is a ton of panic happening right now about Marvin Harrison Jr. But you mentioned his kind of, underwhelming rookie season production, his numbers. He caught 62 passes for 885 and 8 touchdowns. Well, if you look at what his dad did as a rookie, he caught 64 passes for 836 yards and 8 touchdowns. So their numbers are almost identical. So I don't think we need to panic quite yet. Hopefully this is just, a slow start to his career. Like you mentioned, the quarterback play wasn't supreme. The usage of Marvin Harrison Jr. wasn't ideal. We're hoping that he can get a little bit more variety of routes into his repertoire. Used a little bit more on some of those easy routes in his second season and beyond. They were just they were running him on. It was just vertical route, throwing it up to him down the field, 50-50 balls. I mean, you're going to have low efficiency. You're going to have a low catch rate when you're doing that. Now, the question is, are they using him that way because that's what he can do and he can't really do a whole lot more? He's not showing them a whole lot more in practice? I think we saw enough at Ohio State to think that he does have a lot more to his game than what he showed last year.
Yeah. But yeah, and it's like they ran him out there and said, we have this great guy, and we're just going to zip him down the field, and he's going to beat everybody.
Yeah.
And guess what? That's what the defenses are all waiting for. They're like, he's just going to run down the field and try to beat us. So let's not let him do that. So yeah, he needs to be used more, like some of the, the CeeDee Lambs and the Jamar Chases in the game. I'm not saying he is them. But they don't specifically line up in one position on every down. I mean, they're in the slot. They're catching screen balls. They're going long or long crosses. And also, we mentioned he had 62 catches. One of my favorite stats is targets, which can be the fault of either the quarterback or the receiver. But in this case, Marvin Harrison saw 116 targets. That's pretty good. And I want that kind of volume
really yes.
on my team. He's going to get chances.
I would only expect that to go up in his second season.
I agree.
Well. All right. So I'm going to give you my first buy, and I'm going to stick with an underwhelming rookie wide receiver from the 2024 draft class. I'm going to go Rome Odunze. This is another guy who was right at the top. He was right up at the top. He was a top 3 guy. It was Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze. Mm-hmm. All 3 of these guys, they were top 10 picks. But we knew with Rome Odunze, the rookie year was going to be challenging. It was going to be tough. DJ Moore, Keenan Allen ahead of him on the depth chart, while also playing with a rookie quarterback. Despite the expectations for Caleb Williams, he was still a rookie quarterback. And honestly, Rome Odunze really did nothing to make me think that he's anything less than what we thought he was coming out of Washington last year. In fact, he still managed to lead the team in targets and receiving yards 4 times on the season. He also finished with over 100 targets and 54 receptions while ranking top 12 in deep targets and red zone targets. He was number 19 in yards per reception among wide receivers with at least 40 receptions. So he's checking some boxes that we want to see in first-year rookie wide receivers. He was getting a ton of those, valuable looks down the field. They just weren't always connecting. The connection just wasn't there with him and Caleb Williams, and so much so that he actually was 3rd in unrealized air yards, and he had the highest rate of inaccurate targets among players with at least 50 targets, all the way down to 26.7% inaccurate targets. So, I mean, some of that is just the style, the way that they're using him. They're kind of almost like I talked about with Marvin Harrison Jr. They're just running him down the field, throwing out these 50-50s, deep balls, 40, 50, 60 yards down the field. And then you also have a kind of an erratic rookie quarterback who's going to bring that rate down as well. Now, I do think that Ben Johnson is going to come in and kind of rein in the wildness of Caleb Williams and, kind of work some more of that high percentage stuff into the offense like I talked about wanting from Marvin Harrison Jr. I think we are going to get some of that for Rome Odunze. I mean, especially Rome Odunze, because he's a lot more of that. He gives you a lot more of that run after catch than we ever saw from Marvin Harrison Jr. at Ohio State. Rome Odunze had that in his game coming out of Washington. So I think they're definitely going to work some more of that into his game as well. And he's going to continue to be their downfield guy, a big target in the red zone. But I do expect we're going to get a much better catch rate. And we're going to get some looks that will allow Rome Odunze to do some, work in that short area of the field, utilize that run after catch ability. And also, don't forget that Rome Odunze is a big, athletic guy. Yes. Dominant in college. This is a beast. Remember the talk after the combine? This guy, he was like one of the only guys who went out and ran the agility drills, and he absolutely crushed it. This guy has the work ethic. He has the athleticism. He's an all-around big-time wide receiver with a new coaching staff coming in, a second year for Caleb Williams, some offensive line upgrades, hopefully, maybe, the likely departure of Keenan Allen. I think we're going to get a huge second season from Rome Odunze, so you got to go get him now, trade for Rome Odunze right now. This is the cheapest he's ever going to be.
Yeah, and you just hit on two of the points that I was thinking of while you were talking. And one is Keenan Allen's probably not going to be there.
Right.
And that's going to open it up a little bit for not only Rome, but also DJ Moore, who had a little bit of a down year for
Yeah.
him. And the two of them could be, a hell of a 1-2 tandem. So they're trying to get him looks. They just need, like with any rookie quarterback, there's going to be some growing pains. And,
Yep.
just like I said about, Marvin Harrison, everybody thought Caleb Williams was going to come in and set the world on fire. And they were so disappointed that he didn't. Well, that doesn't mean he's not still going to be really good. And he might be really good as soon as the next year, and he's going to get better as Odunze gets better too. So the fact that they're growing together, I think, is also a positive here.
And I think he showed us enough to give me confidence that he can, even if he's not the greatest real life quarterback, I think he's still good enough. He's going to get the football to our fantasy assets. That's all we care about.
Yeah.
All right, who you got next?
Okay, I'll go next to. I've got two kind of really back end ones here. I love my tight ends, Alex.
I sure
I
do.
love throwing a tight end out there, and everybody always needs one. And for his price right now, Mike Gesicki is realistically a trade target.
Okay.
His price is way low. He can be had for a late third. And the reason I really bring him up is because he just had, arguably one of the best years of his career, 65 catches, 665 yards, couple touchdowns came in the same game. But the other thing I wanted to mention is those two touchdowns that came were when he was filling in as basically the second option when T. Higgins was out. And with all of that up in the air, and I, as a Bengal fan, will tell you, I think it's a long shot to see Higgins back in a Cincinnati uniform. And I also know that, bless his heart, Eric All is gone for the whole season. He's not going to be here until the 25-26 season.
Yeah.
So rather than shop around, they might try to make Gesicki a pretty decent qualifying offer. And he is vocally said he wants to stay in Cincinnati. So he seems like the type of guy that's going to be like, yeah, that'll work. I'm not saying he's going to play for free or anything, but he really demonstrated some great things as far as lining up in the slot, lining up where T. Higgins would normally line up. And he could be that number two guy. You got Eric All out. Jermaine Burton's probably going to get cut. That guy is such a mess. He just got evicted for the second time in 2 weeks, which they knew he was a problem coming out of school, but they didn't know he was this much of a problem. So for, again, you're not going to break the bank. For a late third, you could get some depth at tight end that can certainly fill in at starter if you need him to. If you've got somebody else like, if you don't want to spend up for someone like Sam Laporta, who I expect to bounce back after a sophomore slump. I think from now on, the rest of his years will be like last year.
You have Travis Kelce, who sounds like he's going to retire.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's time to be proactive. And, third round picks are a dart throw. And Gesicki's better than a dart throw. So this is a really, really cheap way to get depth. And how do you win championships? With depth. And that's with people on your bench.
Yeah, and he proved last year he can give you those spike weeks. There were several times. I know we talked about him on our Sleepers and Streamers show a couple times as a guy who can, you can plug in especially when T. Higgins is out, and he can give you not just like that baseline production that you're going to find most, tight ends off the waiver wire. He's going to give you an opportunity to give you a spike week. This is a guy who can score 20 points in a week. He showed that. And if he stays, if he does stay in Cincinnati, which, like you mentioned, I think there's a good chance that he does. One, why wouldn't he want to? I don't see, a bunch of teams lining up to throw a bag of money at him. So even if the offers are close, I think there's a good chance that he's going to be like, you know what? I like it here in Cincinnati. I got that dude Joe Burrow throwing me the football. I've had success with Joe Burrow. Maybe we can build on what we did last year, especially if T. Higgins walks out that door. I'm going to have a much bigger role here. I'm going to stay here in Cincinnati for a little bit less money. I'm going to be happy with it.
And not only that, like I said, if T. Higgins walks out the door, all of a sudden the Bengals have more money.
Right.
The first thing people say when I bring this up is, well, they're not going to run out and sign Gesicki and Higgins and Chase. No, I'm saying if Higgins is out the door, then all of a sudden it's because they said, well, we've got these 4 or 5 guys that we need to extend because it's either going to be Hendrickson or Higgins. And then whoever doesn't go, we have that money to spend on somebody else, and Gesicki should get a piece of that pie. And to your point about the spike weeks, I think it was the last 2 weeks of the season, this past season, Gesicki had, I think, 10 catches and 11 catches in back-to-back games.
There you go.
Both of them season highs. So he came through in the clutch. Like, we had to win those games. Didn't make the playoffs still, but we had to win them, and guess who was right there?
Yep. And the money is going to be nothing. I mean, he had a $2.5 million contract last year.
Yeah, something
he gets a little bump from that.
Yeah,
it's nothing. All right. Let's move on. I'm going to stick with wide receiver again. I'm going to go.
I notice we're not talking about running backs hardly at all because of this draft class.
It's a good draft class.
It's a really good draft class, and if you're going out and trying to buy running backs right now, you're going to have a bad time.
So many running backs are at risk of just being swallowed up by the draft.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go wide receiver again. I'm going to go Brandon Aiyuk. He's coming off that torn ACL.
Love it.
He's a value. I mean, his value is about as low as it's ever been, probably ever will be. We got tons of rumors right now. Deebo Samuel gets traded, maybe even cut. Rumors that Christian McCaffrey could be out the door in a trade or a cut situation. We got George Kittle. He's 32 years old. Aiyuk just got paid. They just invested. They told us this is the guy in the offense that we want to invest in the long term. They gave the money to Brandon Aiyuk. He's going to be the clear number one option in that offense for the next few years. The defense on the other side, it's lost a step. I hate to tell you that the 49ers defense took a big step back in 2024, which means if that continues moving forward, we're going to get more shootouts, more comebacks, which means more passing volume in the 49ers offense. And yeah, we look back at the beginning of the 2024 season, even before Brandon Aiyuk got injured, he was a little rusty, but he was coming off of, missing all of training camp and the preseason with that holdout, but he did start to get it going right before the injury. He was the wide receiver 10 in week 5. He had 8 catches for 147 yards on 12 targets. So he was starting to work his way back into being the Brandon Aiyuk that we saw in 2023. Remember, in 2023 and 2022, Brandon Aiyuk had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons before the injury and the holdout. That included 1,300 yards in 2023, over 100 targets, and 75 receptions in both 2022 and 2023. He was number 3 in yards per route in 2023, also number 2 in yards per target and yards per reception. He's still just 26 years old. He's going to be 27 for the entire 2025 season.
Yeah,
he's still in his prime. Yeah, exactly. In his prime. Several years left of his prime, several years left of high-end production we're going to get from Brandon Aiyuk. He's wide receiver 30 on keep trade cut, just a few spots ahead of guys like Jerry Jeudy, Keon Coleman, Ricky Pearsall, Khalil Shakir, Jalen McMillan. He's lumped in with that type of receiver. I would happily tier up from any one of those guys to Brandon Aiyuk, or I could even tier down from a guy like Jordan Addison, who's wide receiver 20 on Keep Trade Cut, or Jamison Williams, who's wide receiver 23, DK Metcalf is wide receiver 25, Chris Olave, wide receiver 22. And other positions ranked around Brandon Aiyuk on Keep Trade Cut. You got Kenneth Walker, TJ Hawkinson, David Montgomery, George Kittle. Brandon Aiyuk is being valued as an early second-round pick. I would take Brandon Aiyuk at that price if I'm a contender looking to add a proven wide receiver. Go get Brandon Aiyuk. He's never going to be any cheaper than he is right now, and he's going to give you big-time production.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for that holdout and the type of coach that Shanahan is. It's not like he rolls into a new season with the same playbook from the year before. So if you hold out and miss all that time and you don't, and I don't know, I'm going out on a limb here. I'm guessing Aiyuk was not sitting on the couch reading his playbook all day, every day. He might have been, but but I doubt it. But so it makes sense that he was rusty when he came back in, because there were times you could see it on the field where Purdy didn't even look at him when he was going through his progression. And I think if anybody needs Aiyuk to be at the top of his game, it's Brock Purdy right now. And the two of them we've seen before can have a really great connection together. So I'm also really high on Aiyuk. I was going to bring him to this conversation before you told me that you were bringing him. So I couldn't be more on board with that.
Well, you mentioned Kyle Shanahan. I just want to add one more point. Kyle Shanahan, he kind of comes off as one of these coaches who is very petty. So a guy coming off a holdout, a guy who sat out all of training camp, I can imagine Kyle Shanahan probably wasn't thrilled about, making him a focal point of the offense.
Yeah, right, doesn't want somebody to act like they're bigger than the team.
Yeah, he's definitely that type of coach. All right, who's your third and final buy for the 2025 offseason?
I'm doing another cheap one. I'm going way out on a limb here. This is somebody that I am actively pursuing in every Dynasty league. I am trying to get my hands on as many shares of Rashid Shaheed as I possibly can.
I like it.
I wish I had a ton of really phenomenal stats to throw at you. I don't. He hasn't had like an enormous season, but besides the kick returns, he was starting to come on last year right when he got hurt. And frankly, Chris Olave is one bad hit from getting a frontal lobotomy. I think Shaheed actually is going to end up being the number one wide receiver in that offense more sooner than later. I don't necessarily know that it's going to be this year, but it could be the year after. But I want to see what he does when he comes back. And not unlike Gesicki, this is somebody you can also acquire unless you run into that guy that's really high on Shaheed. This is somebody you should be acquiring for probably a late third. I think KCC has him listed as like their wide receiver 59. And that's, I think, too low.
Yeah, that's outrageous.
So, I mean, he's a solid receiver. It's a near guarantee. Olave is going to miss a lot of time. Some changes will be coming at quarterback, possibly sooner rather than later, not to use the term again, but, I just like, and it's almost like I got lucky. I just happened to be watching Saints last year every time he got his hands on the ball. And I was like, man, where this guy was undrafted. He was undrafted in 2022. I guess that's what going to Weber State will do to you. But he runs like a 4.4, 4.45 maybe, I think. I mean, he's really fast. So, yeah, I honestly, I'm always looking down the road, and rather than continuing to stash somebody that I don't think is going to see the field. Like maybe I drafted them last year, a rookie, and they couldn't break through like in New England with not Jalen Polk, but
Javon Baker,
who I was a huge fan of. I mean, I'm not a fan of cutting bait on guys too early, but if you can't work your way onto the field
on that team,
because some guy named Butte is getting all the snaps, then I can replace you with somebody better for the same thing I spent on you last year, which was the third round. And I'd feel fine with having Shaheed, a guaranteed number 2 wide receiver, on my bench and possibly in my lineup, than a guy that I'm just going to sit around and wait 3, 4, 5 years for to see if he's actually going to come around before I realize he's my next Jahan Dotson.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about, Rashid Shaheed becoming the wide receiver 1 in New Orleans at some point. Well, we saw, his first 2 years, 2022, 2023, he was kind of this, one-dimensional field stretching playmaker down the field.
Right.
Well, at the beginning of last year, we saw that role completely change. Of course, he was still giving you those downfield shots. He was still making those plays.
He still had 17.5 yards per catch, but yeah.
Right. But the volume was starting to happen. He was starting to run more, more of a full route tree, giving you some more of those underneath intermediate looks that a true, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1 in an NFL offense is going to give you. He wasn't that one-dimensional guy anymore. And then he got injured, unfortunately, but I'm hoping that he'll build on that. I'm hoping that the new coaching staff will, look back and see what he did at the beginning of last year and identify that as something that they want to build on and continue moving into 2025 and beyond. If that happens, he could be the steal of the offseason because he could be, he could give you top 24 numbers for the entire 2025 season. I love this one. You gotta go get him. It's gonna cost you nothing.
Yeah, again, like with Gesicki, it's not, if it fails, it fails. It was a dart throw pick anyway. Wasn't gonna do you any good unless you really hit the jackpot. So why not trade it for a player that has a job? Especially that's in the starting lineup, and just pull the trigger.
So I do got to throw one running back in here.
Okay.
And that's going to be Mr. Chuba Hubbard.
Oh.
Coming off a breakout 2024 season, almost 1,200 yards and 43 receptions, scored 11 touchdowns. He finished as the RB13 in fantasy points per game in PPR formats. And he did that on a bad offense, bad team. And then during the season, they rewarded him with a 4-year, $33.2 million extension. And that was a couple of weeks before Jonathan Brooks re-tore his ACL late in the season. He's going to likely be out for most of, if probably not all, of the 2025 season. We'll see him in 2026, I think. But between the contract, his play, and the Brooks pick in the second round last year, Chuba Hubbard is one of the more insulated running backs in fantasy this offseason. We talked about, that strong running back class. I don't think Chuba Hubbard is at risk of being supplanted by any of those guys. The Panthers are not going to sign anyone. They're not going to draft anyone to compete with him in 2025. Chuba Hubbard is the guy in that backfield this year. There's only a handful of running backs that you can confidently say that about in the league right now, especially, like I said, with how strong the incoming rookie running back class is, how strong it is at the top, how deep it is. There are so many existing running backs that are going to be displaced or at least face some type of serious competition in 2025 that we're not even expecting, that are just not even on our radar as guys who are at risk for that, but not Chuba Hubbard. Chuba Hubbard is not on that list. He is probably one of the safest running backs in football right now. So that makes him a great buy right now, especially for teams expecting to contend in 2025. And even with that said, he's still just the RB15 on Keep Trade Cut. Other guys around him are Kenneth Walker, Chase Brown, David Montgomery, Tyrone Tracy, Brian Robinson, Isaiah Pacheco, who is like the glaring obvious guy who's going to be replaced at some point in this offseason.
But none of those names really are flooring me as being just locked into to their spot.
Not at all. And these are guys who are being ranked very similar to Chuba Hubbard. He's not only the safest of those running backs, and any of those guys except for maybe David Montgomery are at risk of replacement or competition. And even David Montgomery has Jahmyr Gibbs. But like you just mentioned, I like him straight up over any of those guys as the situation is just sitting right now. Maybe if you tell me that Chase Brown doesn't get any competition, maybe I would take Chase Brown ahead of Chuba Hubbard. Even then, it's kind of a toss-up.
And I think he will get competition, whether it's from Moss coming back or the Bengals have always, for some reason, loved having the big bruising back, and I think that comes with playing in the AFC North. That's not as to say that Chase Brown did not really perform well last year. He did. But it's not going to be a solo act.
Yeah, for Chuba Hubbard, I would love to tear down from a guy like a Kenneth Walker, a Christian McCaffrey, a James Cook, a Jonathan Taylor, and get Chuba Hubbard and extra additions onto it back in return.
I like your foreshadowing there.
All right. Well, speaking of foreshadowing, let's move on to our sells. If we're buying, we got to be selling. We're going to each give one sell for the 2025 offseason. Who is your sell?
Okay, I'm going to get grief for this from anybody that watches this little episode here. My biggest sell is AJ Brown. The clock is ticking, my friends. I am not a firm believer in, a cutoff age. As a matter of fact, I've been a big proponent of running backs lasting longer in the past. Like last year when I said that James Conner still had gas in the tank. Wink, wink, nod, nod. AJ Brown had 106 catches in 2023. Mm-hmm. That was his career year. That was when he was the most valuable, easily. He had 88 catches in 2022. Besides that, never had more than 70. Okay. Now I know his game is he can fight for the ball. He can bring it down, especially in deep routes. And that's helpful. What's not helpful is if Philadelphia has realized they can win championships running the ball. And, we saw it's great that AJ had a really good season this year. But we saw the drop in receiving numbers kind of across the board, and particularly in the passing numbers of Jalen Hurts. And that's not set to change anytime soon. Saquon's under contract through 27, I believe, or becomes a free agent in 27, maybe. That sounds about right. And besides that, you've got Devontae Smith breathing down your neck, who's only played 4 seasons, has already outcaught you in 2 of them and gone over 1,000 yards twice to your once. So, it's just, here's the thing. At the end of the day, he's 27 years old. I know there's no shelf life, but you can expect high performance maybe until you're 30. If you're a contender, don't sell him. You know what I mean? Keep him. That could be the crown jewel on your roster. But if you're kind of middling or anything, this is the highest you're going to get out of him. So put him on the market and just try to get whatever you put him on the market publicly and start a bidding war and try to get everything you can out of it. And for the record, I really like AJ Brown. It hurts me to say this. I'm just looking at it as a, business is business. You have an opportunity to cash in on a guy's success in his career so far. He's not going to get better than he is.
All right. Well, we talked about Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze at the beginning of the show. Would you be trying to acquire them plus for AJ Brown?
As a matter of fact, I would trade AJ Brown straight up for Marvin Harrison Jr.
Okay. All right. Dig deep into your inner excellence to find that.
Huh?
I
actually looked that up before the show.
I was looking it up as you were talking. All right. Well, as much fight back or pushback that you're going to get on the AJ Brown call,
you're going to get it from me.
I will get quite a bit on my recommendation that it is time to put Mr. King James Cook on the trade block. I mean, seriously, what is James Cook without touchdowns? And we know touchdowns are the least sticky stat in fantasy football. From 2023 to 2024, James Cook saw decreases in carries. He saw a decrease in targets per game. This is all per game. Receptions per game, receiving yards per game all went down from 23 to 24. However, the touchdowns per game rose from about 1 touchdown for every 3 games to more than a touchdown per game. So the touchdown rate is just not aligning. It's just not realistic to think that it's going to continue moving beyond 2024. He was this year's Raheem Mostert. 7% touchdown rate in 2024. It was 2.1% and 2.7% in his first 2 seasons. 2 rushing touchdowns. Two rushing touchdowns total for the 2023 season from James Cook. 2024, that happened 19 times. He scored 21 total touchdowns, and he was still only the RB10 in fantasy points per game. How is that even possible? I mentioned Raheem Mostert in 2023. Raheem Mostert also scored 21 touchdowns. In 2023, he was the RB4 in fantasy points per game. All right? That's a big difference. Now, passing game for James Conner. Overrated receiver. He's not even the 3rd down back in his offense. He had just 38 receptions in 2024, which was 27th among running backs. By the way, there are only 32 teams. He's 27th, okay? Running backs with more receptions than James Conner. Rico Dowdle, he stinks. Travis Etienne, he stinks. Najee Harris stinks and also shares a backfield. Amir Abdullah had more catches than James Conner in 2024. Like, what the hell are we doing? Jalen Warren shares a backfield, more catches. Zach Charbonnet, he's a backup, had more catches. Kenneth Walker, not a pass catcher. Missed how many games? Still had more catches than James Conner. Austin Eckler, not a starter, more catches. Justice Hill, seriously? Really? Seriously? Justice Hill? Both Tampa Bay running backs, and that's not even including the obvious guys like Alvin Kamara, Devon Achane, etc. And then we look ahead to 2025. Ray Davis, competition in that backfield. Ray Davis looked kind of good. He looked real good. I know you know how much I love Ray Davis. He looked
How
real good
many
in the
times
Cowboys.
did you practice this whole speech in
Oh,
the mirror
I am
before
telling you,
this episode?
I was in my bathroom in front of the mirror with a candle in the dark, just listing all those running backs: Rico Dowdle, Alvin Kamara. Like, come on. Ray Davis is going to give some competition in that backfield, even if he doesn't take over. I'm not saying that Ray Davis is going to take over that backfield. He's going to push for some more opportunities in 2025. Now, we talked about the running back class. Now, stay with me here. I know you're already out, but stay with me. Could the Bills draft a running back in this 2025 draft class? It's a deep running back class. They got a solid roster, top to bottom. That's a pretty good team in Buffalo. They
They're
could
not going to draft
use
a running back.
they could use a luxury pick on a running back, kind of like what we saw with the Lions did with Jahmyr Gibbs, the Chiefs did with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. We could see that in Buffalo. They could draft a running back, and even if they don't,
If
James
Buffalo
Conner.
drafts a running back in this draft, I will stand on my head and blow bubbles out of my ass.
All right, and we will broadcast that live right here. So make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it. Now we're looking at the James Conner contract. It is up over after 2025. There's no way that if he leaves, there's no way that he puts up those types of touchdown numbers anywhere but Buffalo. That's not happening, not even close. So what happens when Buffalo signs or drafts a number one wide receiver? They shift back towards favoring the passing game. He's consistently ranked as a top 8, top 9 running back in Dynasty. I am way out at that price. Too much risk. Put James Conner on the trade block. Get a haul for him. You're never going to – this is the most you're ever going to get for James Conner. Take advantage of that. Put him on that trade block. Thank me later.
That's you said the magic words, which is what I said about AJ Brown. This is the most you're going to get for him right now, and that's the name of the game. It is all about touchdowns for him. I'll defend you on that for sure, because he's never come anywhere near those numbers, and it's kind of funny when you think of all the hubbub that that running backs in Baltimore get. Well, he's going to get vultured by Lamar all day. Nobody vultures like Josh Allen. And James Cook somehow lucked his way in to pay dirt that many times is mind-numbing.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well,
sell them.
Those are our early offseason Dynasty buys and sells. Let us know in the comments. Who are you buying and selling this offseason? Who would you add to that list? And don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel. We'll have content like this all season long.